Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Dr. Seuss's The Cat in the Hat from 2003. And this is the winner of my Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. So I didn't grow up with this film. I was in college by the time it came out, and I have no nostalgia for it because I just saw it for making this review. It's interesting in both vantage points because I both think this is a really interesting, odd movie, and I also think it's really horrible. And I totally get both sides of it. I would say at best, this is really interesting. At worst, it's an incoherent pile of studio family-friendly crap. I don't know. This was a weird movie. It's definitely one of the weirder kids' films I think a major studio has ever released that I can think of. But it's sort of not weird in a way that I think most people who are my age or older, or basically people who weren't kids, would appreciate. It's very brightly colored, it's moving around constantly, it's really strange but inappropriately strange. Like, if you grew up with this kind of media, I can understand getting the beauty in it, but if you are not, you'd just be like, this is awful. So awful, in fact, that Audrey Geisel, who is Dr. Seuss's widow, wanted no more live-action adaptations of any Seuss's work. And she actually, I've read somewhere it's like she legally made it impossible to do that. I don't know how she did that exactly, but it just sounds like it was so bad that she took that off the table completely. This film, which is directed by Bill Welch, who was nominated 4 times for the Oscars for Best Production Design, worked with Tim Burton. He was the production designer on Edward Scissorhands, a lot of Tim Burton films, and even was nominated for things like The Birdcage, A Color Purple, and for A Little Princess, which is where he met the cinematographer of this film, I'm assuming, Emmanuel Lubezki, who's probably considered one of the greatest cinematographers currently living. He works with Terrence Malick, Guillermo del Toro, Alfonso Cuarón quite frequently. He's considered, a big cinephile cinematographer. And the fact that he did The Cat in the Hat is like a little mind-bending. I remember when I found out in the comments of the movie review vote thing here, someone brought that up. I did not know. And I would have found out eventually, but he kind of shoots it a lot better than any of these kind of family Dayglow color kind of films of this era, or even The Grinch ever did. And he seems to understand the space more. And with a great production designer like Bill Welch in charge, you really get like this kind of wonderful world that feels like both fantastical and feels like something you can live in, which is like not an easy thing to do. This film feels very surreal and all over the place, but it understands constantly where it exactly is, which geography in a film, especially in a shooting location, is a lot more important than you actually realize. It's not done very well, there's not a sense of reality, and it almost takes you out of it because you have a natural sense of geography of where you are, and without that, everything sort of falls apart. And this thing has it, and it wants to break that, it breaks it, and it knows how to do that within the space, which a lot of films don't know how to do. I think, the technical aspects of this film are wonderful, but other aspects, like particularly Mike Myers' performance, who this would be the last live action film he was in until about The Love Guru, and he really hasn't made a lot of live action films after this. Apparently it was a lawsuit that made him do it, I've read in some places, and other places just say he was sort of just a jerk on set and he needed excuses later, but who knows. His performance just felt like Jim Carrey really committed to this bit of being the Grinch, and in this it felt like Mike Myers is sort of being under his own Mike Myers-ness. Like, he's not really as good of an actor as Jim Carrey, and I think his own limitations kind of are really shown off in this, but at the same time he works within the kind of family-friendly surrealness of the Cat in the Hat film. And I kind of get why people like it, because it's just so off. It's so off, like I don't trust it, and I kind of don't want it anywhere near me, but I kind of respect how off it is, because there's like only one film that's kind of its own unique blend of whatever the fuck this is, and I'm surprised like this actually did very well in America. It made about $103 million. A film like Speed Racer didn't do well, but this did fine. The people who like it seem to remember it, but almost everyone else doesn't. I think that's also because another big family-friendly hit happened literally at the same time, and that was Elf. And Elf represented a new school of comedy with Will Ferrell coming in and starting to break out in features. And this was clearly like the end of the public having much to do with Mike Myers outside of Shrek. And I get why people thought he could headline a family-friendly film because of Shrek. But this, required a lot of him as an actor, and I just don't think he was really there to do it. He kind of does all these like weird bits and things like that, and much like any Dr. Seuss adaptation, when I reviewed all those Grinch versions, is that they come to this point where like, well, we only have so many pages in this book, so we got to fill it with a bunch of other stuff, and that other stuff just kind of feels like regular kind of kids movie fare. It's just shot and acted in such a weird range, and I've heard Mike Myers had a little more input in terms of the direction and other people's performances. I don't know how true that is, but it does feel like everybody in those things is playing themselves very much heightened and weird in this kind of surreal, strange way. Like even like Sean Haynes, who plays the fish, who the fish almost feels like he's in there just because he needs to be in there. I mean, that's the one thing I find quite unique about this movie, is that there's certain things that are clearly in there because the studio's like, no, you have to have these elements of the books and all this stuff. They don't fit, but sometimes the weird editing has this kind of weird movement to it, like this anti-art quality where you're like, oh my god, like what exactly did you make? And you kind of like respect the horrible atrocity that it is. Like the Cat in the Hat, like it's really like that part in Star Trek the Motion Picture where they're like, two people's like molecules melded together, and they're like, there was a transporter accident, and they're like, what we got back didn't last long, and they never show you, but that's haunted my dreams ever since. And Cat in the Hat is like, I mean, first off, he pops out of nowhere, so he's like a Babadook or something. Like, he's clearly like horrifying. Like, I don't know what, you don't understand any rhyme or reason. The whole like rainy day thing, because I've read Cat in the Hat a lot recently because of my daughter and stuff, and there is kind of a fun surrealness, one day kind of a thing. And what I find odd about all these adaptations is they just like go for so many more complications. I really wish I don't want John Carpenter to do a Dr. Seuss film, but I do think his level of economy in terms of his screenwriting and understanding how to keep things simple, I would have much appreciated a director or producer who understood that a lot more. Because these adaptations, I really hate in kids films where like, there's a workaholic parent and they don't spend enough time with kids and the kids are acting out and then they learn to love each other and you're like, cool, I've not seen this before. And in some ways, yeah, this plays it heightened enough. Like, I sometimes like, even if it's a plot I've seen a million times, an interesting riff on it, and sure, yeah, that does that, but you're like, why did you add that crappy plot to this? It's like, this is a very unique, interesting story, and you added like real estate moms having a party and they don't want to mess up the house. Cat in the Hat's here. He's going to do crazy stuff and go, better not mess up the house. Cool. The idea of that being inserted into this is really boring. And it's not just because I need this movie to be literal translation of Cat in the Hat book or something, which I think is like everyone who's an apologist's immediate retort is like, you just wanted it to be like Dr. Seuss's Cat in the Hat. And not necessarily. I do like it's kind of like weirder moments in this, but it's just that what you're adding on to it doesn't really do that much. You're just giving me a traditionally kind of weirder 2000s kids film. I mean, sure, this is maybe the most interesting of that era, but when you look at like, we had Elf at the same time, why did Elf become what it's become, and why is Cat in the Hat not legally allowed to be shown on TV? I'm assuming because they've never seen it on there. And I think that's because Cat in the Hat is so off and strange and weird, it just doesn't really kind of connect in a certain level. Like there's like certain emotional beats, but all those emotional beats are taken from so many movies. Like the argument the kid has with his mom, I've seen that in so many things with so many parents and so many movies that I was rolling my eyes when I was watching it. When do I get to the part with the titular cat and the titular hat? Like, this is, I get to see, no mom, that's your job from Stepmom, but in a Dr. Seuss thing, I guess. If the riff is, let's take the Cat in the Hat and put it in a 2000s, post-Shrek, as we all thought of 2003 at the time, this post-Shrek world, like, this is like how you're supposed to do these things, and insert it with Cat in the Hat, and that's how it would work. If that's the riff on it, like, yeah, that's sort of interesting, but it's also like, I've lived through that, and this just feels like a boring movie in those elements. Everything with Mike Myers and like the thing where he's like doing an infomercial all of a sudden, that was kind of interesting and bizarre. It did feel like in those times I'm watching a cult movie. It's so often out there. It's like, in other dimensions. I mean, it literally is, but it's like so crazed in what it's doing. I generally kind of like what it did with it. I mean, the Thing 1 and Thing 2 having Grinch makeup, which the Grinch makeup is always so awful. Cat in the Hat makeup was just, does anyone recut this, like made a horror movie trailer with this? Because I really think you could, because it does have certain horrific elements. And actually, and this is, I wanted to read this quote because it's just like, so originally they wanted Tim Allen to be the Cat in the Hat. I don't know if anyone knew this, but he was going to be, and the only reason he dropped out is because he was making the Santa Claus 2. So he couldn't because of scheduling conflicts. But he admitted when he was a child that he was afraid of the Cat in the Hat, and he stated, "My dream is to give it the edge that scared me." That was Tim Allen on his Cat in the Hat. Not joking. There are certain elements, like I like that it was look like Dr. Seuss drawn at the beginning with the Universal logo and DreamWorks and things. There are certain elements that are kind of interesting and I was kind of inquisitive by, but then it like becomes a typical like, oh, we're gonna save the day 2000 thing. And its typical family-friendly genre-ness is sort of more of the death of it. I think if it had just been like all this weird cutting and strangeness, if you had just done like these kids that are bored on a rainy day and the Cat in the Hat shows up, like it's like, why did we have to have a babysitter? Like that didn't really make any sense. Like why do we have to all these other characters? Like if you just like kept it to more of the core, or at least done something more with it, it just felt like this movie needed to be too many other things, and that's kind of its downfall. It's like, well, you have to have the fish in there, but the fish doesn't really work and like isn't introduced before, so just like kind of feels like just suddenly there's a fish there. Like the Cat in the Hat is just suddenly there. I think in the book that is not as true, but in this it is, and it just feels very strange and weird. These things just suddenly popping up, a kind of interesting weird flow to all those things, whereas everything that's just doing a family-friendly film just feels sort of something we've seen before and nothing really very interesting with it. So I think the Cat in the Hat, its own adaptation feels conflicted. You have people who wrote Seinfeld, you have an amazing production designer. I think I've always looked at this movie from afar, and I remember like it had some sponsorship with the post office or something. I kind of have come around to being like, I mean, yeah, it's still horrible. It's definitely horrible. But it's like at least interesting. At least I respect its craft. I respect like sort of what it's trying to do within the weird space it can only exist in. But I sort of think that's the biggest problem with it, is that it has to exist within all these other different things. And Seuss adaptations have the biggest problem because although they're very recognizable and very well known, and I've never seen a kid without a Dr. Seuss book, particularly Cat in the Hat. Like almost every kid has that one. That's one of the most popular ones on their bookshelf, and they're all very familiar with it. So making a movie is like a slam dunk in terms of recognizability. They're not really trying to capture the book. They're trying to do all these other things. And it kind of feels like maybe the problem with big studio filmmaking is everyone wants, their 2 cents in there, but they don't think about how their 2 cents is actually going to help the film. And this is weird amalgamation of everything kind of like works within its own, like, I don't know, let's put this crap in, whatever. And it kind of works within its strange, surreal quality to it. Bill Welch, I would be curious to see him make a film that isn't like this weird, strange Cat in the Hat film. Most of the time, studio meddling just makes bad movies and uninteresting things, like when you talk about a film being like the victim of it. The Cat in the Hat is definitely a victim of studio meddling. It's like very clear. There's like too many cooks in the kitchen, but I sort of like the end result in a weird way. Like I like its weird riffs on these things. Like I definitely think it's hindered by those things. But at the same time, I'm like, this is like could only have existed in the way it is. These weird combination of people, like just like what exactly is this? And you just kind of want to sit there and stare at it and wonder, like, are you going to have meaning? And it might not answer you. It just lies there and you just are fascinated by it. But I had no real thought or expression come from this film. Can and why does this exactly exist? And how has it existed so far? And how has it achieved what it has? It makes you question almost everything in its creation. But I kind of find all of that to be a sense of sort of weird artistic beauty that all that came together. But I also think it's an amalgamation that maybe never should have existed. I'm very conflicted in big extremes on this film, and I'm kind of interested in that I saw it, but also question the whole existence of everything after watching it. So overall, it was fine. So if you have seen The Cat in the Hat and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And this was a winner of the Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Thank you very much for watching.